En mayo del 2003, su vida cambió por completo. En ese mes de ese año, él, a través de un médium, sus guías le dijeron: antes de nacer, planificaste toda tu vida, incluyendo los desafíos más importantes. Él iba a desechar esa información por absurda y sin sentido, pero la información que le dieron durante ese proceso de mediunidad realmente le impactó porque conocían detalles tan personales, tan íntimos, que era imposible saberlos de otra manera. Aún así, él tenía dudas. Sin embargo, sus guías añadieron: hace 5 años tú nos pediste ayuda, tú oraste por ayuda. Dijiste: Dios, por favor, ayúdame. No puedo superar esto solo. Y realmente él lo había dicho, pero en el silencio de su mente nunca lo había verbalizado, hasta lo había olvidado, pero sus ángeles guías no lo olvidaron. A partir de ese momento empezó un proceso de despertar, de conocimiento, de búsqueda que le ha llevado a convertirse en una autoridad sobre este tema: planificación prenatal, planificación antes de nacer. Ha escrito muchísimos libros y ahora, hoy, está con nosotros en este canal para responder a muchas preguntas. Es un honor presentar hoy día a una persona que realmente ha marcado un antes y un después en el concepto de planificación prenatal. Quédate, porque lo que Robert Schwartz nos va a decir hoy realmente cambiará la perspectiva de tu vida. Quédate con nosotros. This is my Sherpa. I am Carlos Lavado, host and one of the creators of this consciousness movement. Our guest today is an ordinary man teaching extraordinary things. He is hypnotist who offers spiritual guidance sessions, past life soul regressions, in between life soul regression to help you heal and discover your life plan. He has written many books. 3 of them are in Spanish: El plan de tu alma, El don de tu alma, and El amor de tu alma, titles in Spanish. It's a great honor to introduce Robert Schwartz. Robert, welcome to my Sherpa.
Thank you, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we started, I really want to thank you and appreciate, because it's my first time doing this kind of thing in English. I used to introduce, interview people or have a nice conversation with them in Spanish. It's easy for me, but it's the first time in English, so I really appreciate your help being here.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I think we can start it in May 2003. I think that day your life has changed. So can you start briefly explaining us about that day and how that in that day your life changed?
Yeah, that was May 7 of 2003. At that time, I was self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing corporate writing. I didn't enjoy that at all and felt that I had come here to do something else, but I didn't know what it was. So on May 7th, I did something that I had never done before. I had a session with a medium, and she channeled my spirit guides, and they introduced me to this concept of pre-birth planning. And what was really impressive is that they knew everything about me without me telling them anything about myself. So I came out of that session with my mind really blown wide open, and it led to a completely new life doing something that's much more fulfilling.
That's really exciting. Why did you push to go in that session? There are some event or something to push go there? I mean, something in your life that have changed, or something in your life that you said, Rob, or you, that some maybe some feelings?
It was really just a nagging feeling that I had come to Earth to do something in particular that I wasn't doing. And until I had that session, I wasn't even sure what it was. But this idea of pre-birth planning resonated so strongly with me that once I heard it, I started to consider writing a book about it. And then within a very short time of the session with the medium, I had a spiritually transformative experience in which I was just walking down the street in the middle of the afternoon, and I had an experience of divine unconditional love for every person I saw. And I understood from this experience that we as souls are made from the energy of unconditional love. So the combination of that and the session with the medium and some other things that were happening at the time propelled me in the direction of writing El Plan de tu Alma.
Oh, that's good. In my research, I found that you teach some 5 main reasons that as souls come to this earth to have experience. Can you explain that 5 main reasons? Because that's really, really important.
It's 5 reasons specifically for planning challenges. So the 5 reasons are balancing and releasing karma, healing, service to others, experiencing contrast, which means experiencing not love, so to speak, and correcting false feelings or false beliefs about oneself. Each one of those in and of itself is a major reason why we plan challenges before we're born, but it's usually a combination of more than one of them is why we do that.
In your research, did you find someone who is experiencing more than 3, for example? That is almost most challenging. I mean, 4 reasons, for example.
There are a lot of people who plan experiences for all 5 of those reasons.
Oh.
This, I think, is a particularly significant lifetime for many people. It's my understanding that a lot of people are trying to wrap up their earth plane experience, and so they packed an awful lot into this one incarnation because their intention is to go on to something completely different when this lifetime is over.
Oh, sure. And the other thing is, I think is really important to many people understand is about the importance of, I call this one, feel victimhood, because if many people understand that we plan our life before we work for, we think we are not victims of that situation we are living. We get back our power. So what is your idea? What is your insight about this?
Well, if you believe that you planned your life and your biggest challenges before you were born, that belief alone will pull you out of victim consciousness. And I think that that's extremely important. Victim consciousness, as I understand it, is literally the lowest vibration a human being can be at. And it tends to be self-perpetuating, so people get stuck in victim mode. If you can pull yourself out of that by understanding that you yourself plan your challenges, that's extremely empowering. And if you then come to some understanding of why you plan the challenges, that's actually even better, because then you can learn those lessons in a much more conscious manner.
Sure. Of course. In this planet, we are full of people who feel victim, who, and many things, not just one thing, but many things. In all your life, have you found that many people about that and how they behave? How do they behave at that people about feeling victims?
I think victim consciousness is very prevalent all across the globe. And most people who are in that frame of mind, they feel powerless, they feel helpless. They just don't feel that they have the ability to turn their lives around. And that's really why victim consciousness is such a destructive thing. It's completely disempowering, and there's no place really to grow from victim consciousness.
I would like, with your permission, to focus a little bit about more Catholic minds. Because as you know, most of the Spanish-speaking people are Catholic. It's quite ironic because most of these people believe in life after death. You are a good guy, you go to heaven. You are a bad guy, you go to hell. But they don't believe or doubt about life before birth, before we were born. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think a lot of what people believe is the result of conditioning by their parents, by teachers at school, by whatever society they're born into, by religious leaders. And sometimes the people who are handing out the conditioning have our best interests at heart. Sometimes I think they don't. I think there are some people who are in positions of power and who want to maintain positions of power. And those people would prefer to keep someone in a state of victim consciousness because then they hand their power to somebody else. So again,
Right.
it's very, very important to pull yourself out of victim mentality.
Sure, sure. Both answers are connected, obviously. The victim mentality, obviously, this one of the um, the next one is, there are many beliefs that are so ingrained in the people. One of these is sacrifice, suffering and sacrifice. Um, Most in the Spanish-speaking people, because of the religion, that idea of suffering and sacrifice is so deep in us, mainly in the women's and especially in mothers. They think that we need to suffer and sacrifice. I would like to help them. What we can say there?
Well, what I've seen in my study of pre-birth planning for the three books is that life plans are set up to be beneficial to everybody who's involved. There are sometimes sacrifices that have to be made, but if those sacrifices are made, the plan calls for it to be beneficial to the person making the sacrifice. That's a very different kind of sacrifice than the kind of sacrifice you're talking about. The way you just described it, the person has not included themselves in the circle of love. And that is really very important to do. Whatever you're doing in the world that's based on love, include yourself in that circle of giving.
Sure, sure. Of course, yes. Um, that is one of my main worries because I know many women, especially, that they think they need to sacrifice themselves to help others, and that is the idea that they push you down. You know what I mean? So that is the reason about the question. That is the reason I would like to get the more information as possible about this subject, sacrifice, because in the Catholic minds, it's really a big deal with this topic.
Yeah, I understand. I'm a hypnotist and I practice a form of hypnosis called a between lives soul regression. And in that kind of session, people can talk to their council of elders, the beings who oversee their personal evolution. And you could bring up the concept of sacrifice to your council, ask them, what did you plan in the way of sacrifice for this current incarnation? And how are you doing in terms of fulfilling those sacrifices? And they can answer those questions. So the between lives regression is the most powerful tool for addressing this kind of thing.
Oh. Do you think we are trapped here on Earth? I mean, it's like a kind of a prison, this planet.
I've heard a number of people say that. I personally don't believe that. It's my understanding that nobody has to reincarnate after an incarnation is over, but you have to understand your perspective when you're on the other side is very different than it is while you're here. One of the differences is from the other side, you see that a lifetime is actually very brief. Another difference is you know that no one is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. And another difference is that you know that the wisdom becomes part of you for all eternity. So from that perspective, you would be much more likely to reincarnate than it might seem while you're here in a body.
Okay.
It's a very different perspective.
Right, sure it is. Sure it is. Let's talk about romantic love. In my 20s, I was very interested in, that book, Twin Souls and Soulmate, Saint Germain. So I remember that book because shocked me in that time. Now my perspective or my mind have changed about that subject. But what you can say about romantic love in twin souls?
Well, this is not really my area of expertise, but as I understand it, There's a difference between soulmates and twin souls. We all have many soulmates, and that's another soul with whom there's a lot of love, usually because there have been a number of past lives together, and you take turns playing different roles for each other in different incarnations. Some people believe that twin flames are halves of the same soul. I've never done any research in that area, so I can't really say. But I do know that we have a lot of soulmates. Sometimes they take romantic relationship form, sometimes they take other forms, but the soulmates play a very important role across many, many lifetimes together.
Just 3 or 4 days ago, I was listening a channeler. He said, we are about 8 billion people on this planet, but it's just 500,000 other souls. So that shocked me as well, because that means in some way we are pretty much soulmate one each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Well, and then add to that picture the fact that all minds are joined, as A Course in Miracles teaches us. And there's really only one being in the universe. It's you, it's me, it's everybody who's listening to this conversation. Each one of us is an individualized expression of the one being.
Sure. What about the pets? Because I know many people who really, really love their pets, have a really deep relationship with the pets. What can we planned our pet before we were born as well? How many cats, dogs, we are different. We planned that.
We do. There's actually an entire chapter about the planning we do with our pets in my second book, El Donde Tu Alma. The story there is about a woman who plans to be a dwarf, somebody who's very, very short. And she does this for various reasons of her own. And then in her pre-birth planning session, her future cats, dogs, roosters, horses come in, and they speak very intelligently about how they will love her unconditionally through that very difficult experience. And all of that is planned before she comes into body.
Do you have pets? Do you know that feeling of that relationship with some pets, cat, dogs, or whatever?
I don't have any right now, but when I was growing up, we had a little dog, a Yorkshire Terrier, for a number of years. So I've experienced that, and I know it can bring a lot of joy into a person's life.
Sure, it was. If you don't mind, I will read some questions I got from many people, different various countries. So I will read some of them. I have a question from Anna from Colombia. I will summarize it because it's quite long. She said, in many of your interviews, you said that homeless are highly evolved souls because they teach us compassion and not to judge. In Europe and North America, it will be difficult to find homeless people, but in Latin America, it's quite common. Does it work in the same way everywhere?
Homeless people, I believe that homelessness is planned before we're born. I think it takes a lot of courage to plan an experience like that, particularly when you consider that the average homeless person, like the rest of us, doesn't remember that they planned that experience. So it's very easy for the homeless person to fall into the kind of victim consciousness we spoke about earlier, and they know that before they come into body. So it takes a tremendous amount of courage to take a risk like that.
Yeah. The question is in the way that in Europe and North America is not quite common to find homeless people. It's more difficult that in Latin America is full of homeless people. So that is the reason I think she asked that question, because I think for her it's difficult to think that every homeless people she found is a highly evolved soul, but it could be, right?
It could be. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the next question is from Mia, from Chile. It's not really a question. It's like a cry for help. She wrote, my son committed suicide 2 years ago. So I blame myself that I could prevent it. It's just what she wrote. but I would like to help some ideas about suicide situation.
Well, there's a whole chapter in my second book, Donde Tom, about the pre-birth planning of suicide. It's never planned as a certainty, but it is planned as a potential. And there are 2 pages in that chapter that I feel contain the single most healing piece of information I've ever come across in all the years I've been researching pre-birth planning. We do a channeling session with Jesus, and he tells us that every suicide that could have been prevented was prevented. And what he means is, if the suicidal person has the slightest openness or willingness to change their mind, Spirit knows and Spirit stages an intervention. That means that if the suicide is completed, the person had no openness to change their mind, in which case there couldn't be an intervention. So bottom line, there was literally nothing she could have done.
I think that answer is going to help many, many people, some feeling of relief, because I think it's that a really hard situation, the suicide, and some people who love committed suicide. By the way, that information you get about Jesus channeling as well, I mean, that is really important.
What was the question?
About Jesus, I mean, you get that information about Jesus from channeling Jesus?
Yes, one of the channels who's in my second and third books, Pamela Crabbe, she channels Jesus. When he speaks to her, he uses his given Hebrew name, which is Yeshua, J-E-S-H-U-A. But those channelings, I think, are some of the most beautiful in the second and third books.
Yeah, for sure. The next question is from Valentina, from Argentina. She said, I have hard time understanding the concept of multitude of life plans, the infinite amount of life plans. Can you give us more insight about that?
So my wife is a channel. She channels a group consciousness, a collective that we call the beings of light. And what the beings of light have told us is that everybody has many, many pre-birth plans, not just one. If you think of a stack of sheets of paper, each sheet of paper is one set of pre-birth plans, and they vary according to vibration. So the sheets at the top of the stack are the highest vibration. That's where the learning is done mostly through love, peace, and joy. The sheets at the bottom are the lowest vibrational plans. That's where most of the learning is done through pain and suffering. So your vibration is very important because it determines which sheet of paper you're living on.
And how we can change our vibration to change different, very good life plans. How we can do that?
There are many, many ways to raise your vibration and keep it high. Just to name a few: prayer, meditation, surrender, acts of kindness for other people, any act of service to a person or an animal or even a tree or another aspect of nature. Anything that causes what some people call the flow state or time distortion. In other words, for most people, there's at least one activity that when you do it, it will feel to you like only 10 minutes have gone by, but when you look at the clock, it's 2 hours later. Any activity that creates that kind of time distortion or flow state for you, there's something there that is part of your pre-birth plan. And when you're in that flow state, you're at a high vibration because you're very, very present in the now moment.
That is really fascinating. So that means if somebody feels that are collapsing the time, as you said, it has passed 2 hours and it's just 10 minutes, that means are in the changing type vibration.
Yeah, it means they're raising their vibration. So, for example, when I write, that's what happens for me. I lose track of time completely. It will feel to me like I've only been writing for a very short period of time. And I look at the clock and it's an hour later, 3 hours later, whatever it might be. That tells me that writing was a big part of my pre-birth plan. For a lot of people, it's art in some form, painting or poetry, something like that. But whatever it is that creates that kind of flow state for you, that is something you really want to pursue because it's part of your plan and it will raise your vibration.
I will follow with the next question. It's from Jacqueline from Mexico. She said, I consider myself a warrior of life. It is true that the life plan of warriors of life is different and before that, quote unquote, normal people.
It is true, and there's one key difference. The one key difference is that the light worker, like everybody else, plans a particular mission before they come into body. But the way a mission works for a light worker is that you plan to immerse yourself in the vibration of whatever it is you want to change. So, for example, let's say that you choose as your pre-birth mission child abuse. You want to do something about child abuse. If you're a light worker, you would be very likely to put yourself in a situation with a family where you will be abused as a child. The thinking is that you raise your vibration from within the vibration of child abuse, and by doing that, you change the vibration of child abuse so it becomes less prominent.
Okay. It's pretty much like know the system and change the system from inside.
Yeah, exactly. A good metaphor to think about this, you know, if you have a dropper that has a dye in it, a dark dye, and you use it to place a drop of the dye into a glass of water, that one drop will change the color of the entire glass of water. That's essentially what happens when a light worker goes into a particular vibration, raises their vibration within themselves. It's like that drop of dye diffusing through the glass of water.
Okay. I have one personal question. It's about the ego and the life plan. I think my understanding is the ego doesn't take part in the plan, but as soon as we were born, the ego get control of that plan. Is that right?
That it's not quite that simple as I understand it, but that is essentially correct. The pre-birth plan is created by your soul in consultation with guides, angels, ascended masters, God or source, or whatever term you would like to use. So that plan is based completely on unconditional love for everybody involved. When you come into body, due to the limitations of the five senses, you perceive yourself as a completely separate being. Now, that is an illusion. There actually is no separation. We're all one. But due to the limits of the five senses, you will think that you are separate from everybody else. That feeling and belief of being separate brings the ego into existence. The ego is fear-based. It wants to preserve itself. And so it will tell you things that are intended to keep you in a state of fear. And so the challenge becomes, number one, to recognize the voice of the ego. Number two, to understand that that is not you. You're the one who's hearing those thoughts. You're not the one who's thinking them. Once you know that, then there's some space between you and the thoughts. And then you can choose not to believe them. And that is a huge developmental step. The average person believes every thought that occurs to them, and it actually doesn't occur to them that the ego is lying and that they don't have to believe what the ego is saying. But eventually everybody will come to understand that.
Because that idea that if that thought is inside me, obviously it's mine. It's not exactly in that way, right? Because not that thought, that, monkey talking, that voice, not as all the time is our. I mean, it's the ego most of the time, that talking, that fear-based belief voice doing something. Because I know many people who are struggling with this voice of ego voice.
Well, that's exactly right. You probably know who Don Miguel Ruiz is, the author of The Four Agreements. He wrote another very good book called The Voice of Knowledge. The voice of knowledge is the term he uses to refer to the ego and all of its insane thoughts. So he talks in The Voice of Knowledge about how he had a profound spiritual awakening. And after his awakening, he started to observe the so-called voice of knowledge very, very closely. And after listening to its thoughts closely over a long period of time, he came to the conclusion that the voice of knowledge is wrong over 90% of the time. So he offers two pieces of advice to the reader. One is, don't believe anything your voice of knowledge tells you because it's almost certainly wrong. And two, don't believe what anybody else tells you because they're just repeating their voice of knowledge. That's his advice.
Yeah, it's quite right. Yeah, but how we can recognize which voice is the right voice or the wrong voice is quite sometimes it's quite difficult. Right?
Well, the soul doesn't really speak through words, it speaks through feelings. Feelings are the language of the soul. And in particular, feelings of love, peace, joy, and excitement. Those are all communications direct from your soul. Anytime you feel love, peace, joy, or excitement, that is your soul saying, whatever you're thinking or whatever you're doing right now, that's good. Keep going in that direction.
Yeah, right. When I was preparing this interview, I had another interview. I don't remember. I think it's Buddha at the gas pump. You explained very well about atheists, the people who doesn't believe in this kind of thing. And you said something like, because they choose not to believe in that kind of thing. That is the reason they, for example, the people don't believe in life, planning life before birth. It's because they serve in that way to not to believe in that life plan.
I do believe that. I believe there are people who plan before they're born not to believe in the idea of pre-birth planning. That could be for almost an infinite number of reasons, but they concluded pre-birth that this is the kind of plan that would best serve their growth and their learning and their healing. And this is why I always say that my work is an offering, but not an attempt at persuasion. I don't want to persuade anybody of anything because I feel that whatever path they're on is the best path for them, even if they don't believe in anything about pre-birth planning.
Right. Sure it is. It's a good answer. What about death? Do we plan our death? Exactly the day, the time, maybe even the place? Do we plan that or we change?
Well, my understanding is that everybody plans at least 2 or 3 exit points. An exit point is when you leave the physical body and return to your non-physical home. So when would you take an exit point? Well, basically under one of 2 sets of circumstances. One is your soul has concluded that you've done what you came here to do and you've learned what you came here to learn, so it's time to go home. The other set of circumstances under which you would take an exit point is the exact opposite of that. Your soul has concluded that for whatever reason, you will not be able to do what you came to do or learn what you came to learn. And in that case, it's still time to go home. But then there's a sense of incompletion, and the soul would plan another lifetime to finish the plan.
So, yeah, that is the idea, exactly. What about the situation we are living? Today, I know this interview is gonna posting in YouTube 1 week after, but today the Queen of England has passed away. So many things are changing in the world. Everything is moving. Everything is. It looks like there are many problems in all over the country. But what is your opinion about the situation we are living now as an entire world, as a planet?
I think what is happening is that the entire planet and every person on it are going through what you could call a purification process. And what that means is that there's a lot of light coming direct from source, from God, and this light is flooding the planet. The light has the effect of bringing to the surface, to conscious awareness, everything that is unlike itself. In other words, everything that is not love, everything that is of a low vibration, everything that needs to be healed. This is why you see so much chaos in the news now. It's happening globally to the entire human race, and it's happening individually in everybody's life. It's just that the average person doesn't understand that this is what is happening. So it appears on the surface that everything is getting worse, and on the surface it is getting worse. But that's only because this light is bringing to the surface all of the low vibrations for healing. And after that healing takes place, and it will, in the long run, things are going to get much better. That's my belief.
It could be that we are changing to another life plan. We raise our vibration. Obviously, we are changing a different life plan. The frequency is more higher, and our vibration is more obviously high as well.
I agree with that. It's my understanding that the Earth has moved from the third dimension, or what you could also call third density, into the fourth dimension or fourth density, and we're on our way to fifth density. Fifth density, as I understand it, is a vibration of unity consciousness and unconditional love. So if you want to be on the Earth that will exist in fifth density, you need to raise your vibration, return to a state of unity consciousness and unconditional love for self and everybody else. And the way you do that is to go through this purification process. Trust that the light will bring into your conscious awareness everything in you, in your consciousness, that needs healing. And then it's up to you to find the specific way or ways in which you will create the healing.
Right. Are you seeking the enlightenment in this lifetime? Is your purpose life maybe? Not yet?
Well, what's your definition of enlightenment?
I mean, to like Christ, Jesus Christ, like Buddha, in this lifetime, get all the awareness on who you are and just leave the planet because you don't need to stay here anymore.
Well, I have a very specific definition of enlightenment. I think of enlightenment as abiding non-dual awareness, meaning that the universe is inherently non-dual in nature. It doesn't look that way to us because Earth is a realm of duality, left and right, up and down, light and dark, good and bad. But that is essentially an artificial construct. It's an illusion. Most of the universe is non-dual in nature. It's just light, it's just love, it's just good, it's just positive. So there are people who are in body who exist in a state of permanent non-dual awareness. There are a lot more people who get little glimpses of non-dual awareness, but it doesn't last very long. It's an unstable state, as I understand it. As for myself, I don't feel that I've had an experience of non-duality in this particular lifetime. So whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know. I just try to fulfill my mission to bring information about pre-birth planning to people, and I trust that I'm on my path.
I think I read in some of your books that we reincarnate in group family souls, the same group of family. That means that I am my great-grandfather. I mean, could be that my great-grandfather is some version of my great-grandfather.
It does mean that. And in the private sessions and the workshops where I've done regressions with people, there have been people who, in the past life portion of the between lives regression, they went back to a past life, maybe 5 or 6 generations ago, and they discovered that they were their own great-great-great-great-grandmother or great-great-great-great-grandfather. It's mind-boggling to think about, but that is what it means, yeah.
I read in another book as well, each place had some vibration. So that means we reincarnate in the same place many times because, for example, United States has some vibration, Latin America another vibration. That means we reincarnate in some special place most of the time.
Well, as a general rule, you incarnate in a location and other circumstances that is a vibrational match for you. So, for example, if you have a lot of self-love, you would, which is a very high vibration, you would be likely to choose parents who are going to treat you with a lot of love, and other circumstances around your birth that are loving in nature, high vibration in nature. Somebody who is still working on self-love, but hasn't quite developed yet, that's at a lower vibration. that's going to be a vibrational match for parents who are not as loving as the ones I just described. And that applies to places as well. Places do have their own vibration. They also have their own karma. And that's another factor that figures into the plan.
By the way, how you define karma? Because that is a quite difficult topic for many people to understand. The karma definition.
My definition, I think, is unusual. What I've seen in my work is that it's a feeling of incompletion. So, for example, let's say that two people had a past life together in which one was ill and the other was the caregiver. When that incarnation is over, they'll have a life review, as we all do. They'll see this caregiving relationship, and they may or may not feel complete with it. If they feel complete with it, then as I understand it, there is no karma, and they'll go on to plan something completely different. But if they, for some reason, feel incomplete with that caregiving relationship, the feeling of incompletion is the karma. So let's say they feel that way. How do they balance the karma? Well, most likely they'll trade places. The one who was ill will plan to be a caregiver. The one who was the caregiver will plan to have a physical illness.
Basically, it's feeling of incompletion. No?
That's
how
correct.
how they souls manage that one.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. In this short interview, for the next question is, I think you are planning some workshops in Spain, or I think in Colombia. If you would like to say something about that?
Every year there's usually at least 2 or 3, and sometimes more, online workshops. Ever since COVID started, all the workshops have moved online that are in both English and Spanish. Sometimes they're produced by a woman in Spain, and it's primarily for people in Spain. Sometimes they're produced by a woman who lives in Mexico and Colombia, and those are primarily for people in Mexico and Colombia. Sometimes those two women team up, and we produce a bigger workshop that is for any Spanish-speaking person anywhere. So there will be another Spanish online workshop later this year. I think it's in November, and at least 2 or 3 next year, and every year thereafter. Go to the events page at yoursoulsplan.com. You can see the whole schedule there, and sign up for the newsletter on the website. The newsletter will keep you informed of all of those workshops.
Thank you, Rob, for telling us. In this short interview, short conversation, I think it's the Spanish-speaking people will have some idea about your work, about your teaching. I really want to thank you again for this conversation and really appreciate your help. Maybe I think the next time in this interview, you accepted that.
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I know you're doing everything you can to raise consciousness. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. You are a light worker yourself, and I'm glad that you're fulfilling your pre-birth plan. It's helping a lot of people.
Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate your words, and see you the next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.